What's up, guys? Welcome to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at Tesla stock, ticker symbol TSLA, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of the next trading day, Tuesday, April 9th. Okay, guys, Tesla stock here today up $8.08 per share. That's plus 4.49%. On Friday, we, of course, had the news that Tesla was going to shift their focus away from the so-called Model 2. In after hours, shortly after Friday's analysis video was released, we got the exciting news that they plan to release the long-awaited, at least by me, I'm sure by many of you, robotaxi on August 8th. Now, many analysts, many people, investors, and so forth are calling this a game changer. The robotaxi with Tesla is something I've been extremely excited about for, years now. And listen, there's always going to be speculation that it's not going to hit. Elon's trying to fluff the stock price and they'll figure it out later, where they're not really ready, but in the next 4 months they'll figure it out. We get some of that fading going on in pre-market. Investors maybe thinking they're calling Elon's bluff, but the stock held. The stock held the move today. And that in and of itself is extremely impressive. So listen, let's take a look here, starting with doing an analysis on the volume profile on the 5-minute chart, and let's just pull out as much bias as we can from a variety of factors here today. Everything the market will give us, let's take a quick look at. Listen, guys, if you're not yet aware, Tesla is now a daily upload here on the channel. It hits every single trading day at 5 p.m. Eastern Time sharp. So if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. Now let's take a look. Here are the moves today off the open that I want to take a look at. We have this big move here. I just want to take a look at that whole thing, including each fade. We have a pop, fade, right? In the intraday high was in there as well. And honestly, guys, that's really all I care about, because the rest of the day was just a lot of consolidation. And now, I'm actually extremely interested in the movement here today on Tesla, because it seems like the street is buying what Elon's putting out there. And that's... you can't argue that's not, a lot of the times Wall Street will try to call Elon's bluff, even if he ends up being correct and actually delivering. It's not entirely common that Wall Street will take what he says at face value. Let's take a quick look here and see if we can't, pull out any bias. Now, this move that we got, very contextual open, okay? We're seeing normal fading on the volume. On this quick, we got the pop and fade. On these fades, I really want to look at the volume differences between the pops and the fades. Okay, now the fade, we continued to get contextual volume off the open. That's very normal to see, is that fade. In volume, not in stock price. I realize I'm saying fade for the price and the volume, but that fade in volume off the open is very contextual. So there's really nothing there as far as the first pop and fade. So now we're forced to look at that second pop and fade into that intraday high. Now what we got, as the stock price pushed higher and higher, right, you can see this is a pretty aggressive up move. It pulled into that 9 EMA, which is not, incredibly common for a big blue chip like Tesla to be trading off that 9 EMA. That is a sign of strength when you're getting a lot of buyers buying off that quick moving average there. That's a kind of scalp setup that I take daily on in-place stocks. But on blue chips, there usually is no edge in those. So it's interesting to see Tesla doing that here today. And, there's nothing obvious, but I do want to point one thing out to you guys. We got quite a bit of volume popping on the move up. And then after we hit the intraday high and pulled back, we saw volume pull back with it. Okay. Even though we have some red bars mixed in here, I think it would be a little bit ignorant to look at this and say there's no bias at all. There's a very small amount of bias on that upside move, which leads me to believe that we're seeing a small amount of bullish bias, even though some of these bars are red. Okay, you were seeing selling back in that 9 EMA, but then you would respect it and pop immediately after. And then finally, once we faded below that 9 EMA, which you can see occurring right here, the volume just tanked off with it, and you lost a lot of interest. Okay, which is not a horrible thing to see. You want to see a small sample size if you're a bull on pull-ins, especially when you're breaking a level that was previously being respected. Okay, so that's an interesting volume profile, but let's move on and take a look at the psychological self-fulfilling prophecy levels that I'm watching here come tomorrow. Now, if you remember Friday's analysis, it was right before the news hit. I uploaded the video, and like an hour later, or less than maybe, Elon comes out and makes the robotaxi announcement. But that's why I talk in these videos in a way that stays relevant no matter really what happens with the movement of the stock. That's why I'm talking scenarios, okay, and what each particular side would want to see. That way, if all of a sudden you get some big after hours or pre-market move the next day, because really we're looking at the next day here, so we have to talk in scenarios because anything could really happen. We could get any news at any time. It all held up, okay, and I thought it was really interesting to watch after hours Friday as well as pre-market here today, because what did we talk about on Friday, right? Here on the 30-minute chart in particular, we were quite a move away from reclaiming both the 50 and the 200 period moving average. Well, guess what happened today? The stock broke and held both of these levels. But not only that, in pre-market, and I actually thought this was a beautiful thing, we pulled back, held beneath both the 50 period and 200 period moving average, ripped through them off the open on high volume, lower volume, right? You see a lower volume pullback here on the test of the higher level, the 200 period. And the only thing that could have been better is a pop in volume on the pull away. But we got volume holding up deep into the day, which is a close second, and then consolidating above both of those levels. Listen, bulls, as far as the 30-minute is concerned, you could not have asked for a better day one break. But it's just that, it's a day one break. So we got to look to, never declare victory too soon on a day one break. Tomorrow, any retest, the 50-day might cross over the 200, that's fine. Whichever moving average is higher upon any retest, bulls, you're going to want to hold that. Bears, since both of those are relatively close together, it's within your wheelhouse to crack both of those to the downside here tomorrow. That's what you guys would want, a high volume break downside, low volume retest of whichever one is lower, ideally, and a high volume rejection. Bulls, if we see a retest at all, you just want to see whichever moving average is higher at that particular moment, hold with a high volume bounce. For bulls, I don't care what volume we see on the retest, as long as the bounce is on a big sample size, high volume. Let's move on now to the 4-hour chart and take a look, because today, you notice anything? We got hung up by the 50 period here on the 4-hour chart. Really simple, guys. Bears, you want to see a high volume rejection. Bulls, you want to see a high volume break upside with a low volume confirmation, right? Or more so a low volume test, I should say. And then a high volume bounce, which is that confirmation. Okay. The reason, I know I go through these quickly and it might be a little bit confusing for some newer traders. Listen, that's okay. Just think about it this way. Why do I say that? Right? Because on the break, if you're a bull, you want the stock to go up and break any possible psychological barriers. So you want it to break above the 50 period on as much volume as possible, because that's a big sample size agreeing with the break. Now, why do you want the retest to be on low volume? Right? I know some of you can answer that immediately. Because you want a lower sample size of market participants, that's algorithms and humans, betting on the break back downside below. As the stock comes in, you want lower volume, which means you have less bets occurring. Right? On the confirmation, the bounce, as the stock starts to bounce away from that level, confirming the break and hold, you get a bunch of people FOMOing back in, pumping up the volume and saying, yep, we were correct. A big sample size agreeing with the bounce. Right? You start to think about it that way, and I think what I'm saying makes a lot more sense. Okay, it's a lot easier to understand even for newer traders. Now, let's move on here to the daily and take a look at the big story here. What are we looking at? Well, things have changed a little bit here, back into a little bit more of the bulls' favor than we were seeing last weekend. Right, now this is the daily. It's not going to show after hours movement. That's okay. All we need is what's here. Bears, last Friday, you guys were looking at a downside break of that 166.50 to 167 bottom region of this channel here. The top end of that channel is 177.50 up to 180. We're now back in the middle of it. Okay, the bulls kind of held that off with that news. Bears, you guys want to reclaim that level, because this is a very obvious channel. I know many traders have this because it's become such obvious technical levels that it's slowly becoming psychological levels now as well, as the levels become more and more obvious to more and more people. Okay? And by the way, these levels go back a ways, so you might notice here that some of these tests, you're like, why did you draw the lines there? These go back. We've had these drawn for a while. And they're always ranges, by the way. They're never exact pennies, right? Tesla's too I don't want to use the word expensive because that implies a fundamental expensive price, which some people might argue. But I just mean higher priced, right? You can't have a $170 stock and expect it to hold something to the exact penny. It's always going to be a range, even a multi-dollar range, like is in the case of 177.50 to 180. Bulls. Notice how we've struggled to get above even 177.40, 177.50. I think a really great scenario would be to reclaim 180. Just get up out of this entirety of this channel, right? Just get above 180 and get away from there. Now that, you have that 50-day moving average, which then is in the way, but we'll deal with that when we get there, right? Just to get above 180, that's a 4.5% move. I understand it's a big move, but we just had a 4.9% day. Granted, we had the help of some news, but we have to discuss anything that's possible within a single day's move of Tesla. That's like the best case scenario if you're a bull. We'll deal with the 50-day moving average if we get there, when we get there. Now, let's finish up here with the bias in the chain. Okay, we had 1.78 million total contracts traded here today, 930,000 calls, 849,000 puts. Very small call side bias here in the chain today. Look at this, the 0 to 20 delta range. Those are those short-term speculators. Actually very undecided. 322,000 calls, 332,000 puts. So just barely a put side bias, but the bias here is still smaller than the call side bias on the overall ratio. Listen, if you get value out of these videos, again, subscribe to the channel. Tesla hits every single trading day at 5 p.m. Eastern time. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.